My name is Katharina von Schnurbein. I'm the European Commission Coordinator on combating anti-Semitism and fostering Jewish life. I'm very pleased to moderate this afternoon panel where we will look at two aspects. One is the importance of strategies in order to fight anti-Semitism and to foster Jewish life, and the other aspect is specifically the challenge of online anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism, we often say it, is incompatible with EU values, with our general values, and it's certainly incompatible with the European way of life, and yet it is on the rise. And before we go into the panel, I was asked by Robert to give you a bit of an overview over what Vice President Jourova already touched upon, the EU strategy on combating anti-Semitism and fostering Jewish life that was adopted a year ago. President von der Leyen, when she came into office in December 2019, as one of her first public speeches, spoke about the need to address anti-Semitism. She increased my team, which is always a sign, of course, that there is sincerity with a public and a political will. And we started to work on a strategy and very concrete actions in order to address anti-Semitism on the one side, and on the other side also what we can do in order to foster Jewish life. And really the heart of this strategy is about ensuring that Jewish life across Europe can prosper. And that is because we know that whenever Jews left Europe, it was also bad for Europe. And we say that, you know, addressing anti-Semitism, fighting anti-Semitism is also fighting for democracy, and I think we need to understand this link. Anything in the strategy is therefore geared towards what can we do in order to ensure that Jews and the Jewish community here in Europe see a future for themselves and also for their children and their children's children here in Europe. And one important aspect that we are going to discuss this afternoon is with regards to addressing anti-Semitism online, which is the main entry door for anti-Semitism into our living rooms and therefore needs urgent addressing. Another important aspect was to make anti-Semitism visible in order for it to fight it. I don't know what your experience is, but I often hear as a reaction, you know, where is the anti-Semitism? I don't see it. Yeah, it is often because when you're not Jewish, then you don't necessarily feel it. But we have measured it, and we know that 9 out of 10 Jews in Europe see that anti-Semitism has been on the rise in the past 5 years, and I believe that when next year we do the survey again among roughly 16,500 Jews here in Europe, probably this figure will have even increased. So we have been using the definition of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance as a prerequisite to ensure that we see all different forms of anti-Semitism as equally pernicious, and we address it. And this includes also the aspects of Israel-related anti-Semitism, which is often a cause for debate, maybe not in these circles here, but in many other places, and it's very important to address these aspects holistically. A prerequisite for ensuring that Jewish life can flourish, unfortunately, is also that there is sufficient security. And we've been very clear in our strategy that security of citizens is the responsibility for each member state. It's the core responsibility of states to ensure the safety of the citizens. This must be true also for the Jewish communities, and it cannot be that the Jewish communities have to pay for their own security. And we have upgraded our funding from the European side for security, but we expect all EU member states to ensure the safety and the security of their citizens, and also the financial means and support that is necessary. Other aspects, and I'm not going to go very much into it here, but it is the question of Holocaust remembrance and education. I think we all agree that it is key to ensure that we find, and we heard it in the previous panels, that we find new ways of remembrance given all the challenges we are facing in the different areas, society, but also with regards to the survivors that are passing away. There are these challenges, just two concrete initiatives that I would like to mention. One is a network of young ambassadors, European ambassadors, on promoting the Holocaust, and it was a bit what Mr. Avi Ruth mentioned here, to ensure that young people meet Holocaust survivors, and out of that, either in a digital way, become capable of refuting Holocaust distortion if they are influencers, if they're online, or they become empowered to organize in their own circles Holocaust remembrance initiatives and events together with Holocaust survivors, but also learn about the facts in a way that they themselves can become ambassadors. The second important initiative is a network of places where the Holocaust happened. We need to understand how local it was, what it meant when the neighbors were leaving and were gone, and what inaction meant then and what it means today when we see anti-Semitism on the rise, and what it means for our responsibility to act. And so we want to make, in particular, also smaller sites visible that often don't have the means to connect in networks outside their country, for example, but they could learn a lot from each other. So it can be deportation sites, it can be places where Jews were hidden, to also show the civil courage that people had, and to work with with righteous among the nations, and people that are capable of transmitting the values that we want to transmit today. Another aspect is to empower Jewish life on campuses, and support Jewish student activities, and also activism, Jewish activism in general terms. So we have made the European Union of Jewish Students framework partners for the European Commission, Vital is here, to ensure that they on campus can be visible, can initiate important discussions that are necessary, as we see in particular with regards to Israel-related anti-Semitism, that becomes more and more prevalent also in academic circles. And the other aspect is that we think that the student unions also on national level, through the European Union of Jewish Students, can then benefit from money, EU funds for national projects. I don't want to make it very long, but there is an external arm that is important for working with partner countries, of course working closely with Israel, and in multilateral organizations to address anti-Semitism and ensure the support for Jewish life also in those gremia. And then the last but important aspect is that we need to lead by example as institutions, and I believe for all those who are here from states, it is important to understand that we as institutions also have our own responsibility to normalize Jewish life. It cannot be that Jews hide their identity while working in state institutions. That can be done through, for example, our president last year lit the Chanukiah in the public square in the EU quarter, and she will do so again this year. We established the IRA definition as the basis for any equality question within the European Commission. We do training on Holocaust and also on anti-Semitism, how Jewish life, what Jewish life looks like actually within the Commission. And we've done also study visits now for colleagues to go to Israel. And so just a few ideas that I was supposed to put out here, because the strategies also, and all member states of the EU have agreed to have national strategies on combating anti-Semitism by the end of this year, 2022. And the Fundamental Rights Agency today actually brought out their new overview over anti-Semitic incidents in the EU and progress with regards to the fight against anti-Semitism. And it shows that up to date, only 14 EU countries, so half, have strategies. We expect certainly a few others by the end of this year, but it is an obligation for EU member states to have such a strategy and to ensure that these strategies are accompanied by a clear reference to the IRA definition, and secondly, to appoint special envoys that then also hopefully have a budget and staff in order to operate. So much as a presentation, and I will now join this esteemed panel. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is a real pleasure to have you on the panel here with us today. We have next to me Rabbi Andrew Baker, who is the OSCE Chairperson-in-Office on combating anti-Semitism and also representative of the American Jewish Committee, Director for International Affairs. František Vrabel, who heads the he heads an organization that is called Semantic Vision, and they have technical solutions with regards to addressing hate speech and also disinformation. Welcome to you. Ambassador Dion, who is the Canadian ambassador to France and Monaco at the moment, but has been ambassador to Germany and is the special envoy on European issues for the Canadian government. Thank you very much for joining. And last but certainly not least, so we start with a woman, we end with a woman here, Ira Rosensaft, responsible in the German Welfare Council for Jews for digital affairs, and she will give us the Jewish perspective as to the expectations with regards to national strategies. I start with you, Rabbi Baker. You've seen and you've been in this area for very long. And I think you've seen things that have worked and things that have, disappeared, let's say. And my question would really be with regards to the movement that we have seen now in the last years, the role of strategies and really setting goals, setting targets, that in how far this has helped to make sure that as a whole we are moving forward with regards to addressing anti-Semitism.
So, Katharina, thank you for the introduction, and to all of you for being here and having me as part of this panel. You know, in 1995, Gary Luck, an American Nazi from Nebraska, was arrested in Denmark, extradited to Germany, and put on trial. Luck provided anti-Semitic and Nazi material. He shipped them to Denmark, and then he smuggled them into Germany, where they were distributed to neo-Nazi groups. At the time of his arrest, German authorities said he was the single largest source for these illegal materials in the entire country. He had been labeled by the ADL as among the world's most prominent Nazi propagandists. He ended up serving 4 years in prison, returned to the United States, and he's largely faded from memory. But this story illustrates how the spread of anti-Semitic hatred has so totally changed in the space of less than 30 years, and obviously how difficult it is for countermeasures to keep pace. You know, it's as though the horse and buggy were replaced by a Formula One race car in 28 years. And that's really what we're up against. Of course, one thing that hasn't changed is the lethal real-world consequences of that spreading hatred. The groups in Germany that received this guy's propaganda material were also amassing arms and ammunition. But today, anti-Semitism moves seamlessly across borders and around the world through the internet, through social media. It infects groups, it infects individuals, and they have little difficulty in acquiring weapons and carrying out attacks on Jewish targets. Local police and national authorities must still address these real-world security concerns. They're challenged by limited resources, by limited manpower, even if there is the political will to do something. And that's not always the case. But I think, as been noted, and I want to restate, there is a growing consensus on the steps government should take, which is really to the point and the question you've asked, Katharina. They're enumerated in OSCE commitments, in the EU directives that you've played such a role in. They're supported by guidance from IRA, from the Council of Europe, etc. And so just to sort of highlight several of them, let me go through them quickly. All those with the responsibility to combat anti-Semitism must understand it. And thus it is important for governments to adopt and to employ the IRA working definition. As you know, it offers clear, succinct, and pragmatic examples of both traditional and new forms. I would add for the advanced student to look at our own AJC publication, Translate Hate. It's literally an A to Z glossary of terms with illustrations that's regularly updated, going to the very point that was made at the beginning here. Do I see anti-Semitism? How do I know it? The security needs, the second point, for Jewish communities are every bit as real today as they've been now for years. Governments more and more today recognize this, which is a change from 10 years ago. But recognizing it is not always the same thing as addressing it. I would specifically reference the OSCE ODIHR publication addressing the security needs of Jewish communities, a practical guide. It really can be an essential reference for governments in dealing with this. Adequate police protection, when and as needed, coordinated activities between authorities and Jewish community security specialists, a crisis management plan. The necessary physical enhancements need to be provided for Jewish schools, for synagogues, for community buildings, and this should be paid for by governments. Unfortunately, as we know, too much of those security needs are still borne by the Jewish communities themselves. Holocaust education, obviously a focus here. It's an important tool to combat anti-Semitism, but I would note it has a special relevance in the countries where it took place, in the countries of Central and Eastern Europe, where the crimes of the Holocaust occurred, and where the role of local collaborators and perpetrators may still not be acknowledged, let alone addressed. Honoring fascist-era leaders or ignoring their anti-Semitism because they were strong anti-communists is not just a debate for historians. It undermines the very sense of security and well-being of these Jewish communities. After all, they themselves are the descendants of Holocaust survivors. So we must recognize, unfortunately, that the restitution of former Jewish property, a primary focus for us here, has also and frequently continues to engender anti-Semitism along with it. And we need to understand that an effective strategy to combat anti-Semitism requires a whole-of-government approach. Law enforcement, hate crime monitors, legislators, prosecutors, judges, educators, all must be activated and involved. And we know this will not happen automatically, simply because they fall into various and separate government ministries. That is why adopting a national action plan, appointing national coordinators, is such an important step to move beyond this silo approach. And of course, we are enormously indebted to the European Commission, to its coordinator, for making what once was a rare best practice example now becoming the norm. And finally, it may be less appreciated, but it is a growing problem in some European states that also poses a serious challenge to Jewish community life. And this is the effort to restrict basic freedoms of religious practice. Here I speak about legislation in the name of animal welfare or children's rights that would ban or severely limit kosher slaughter and brit milah. These are essential practices for observant Jews. They are essential for the maintenance of continuing Jewish life. Ironically, when countries, in some cases, banned kosher slaughter a century ago, they were doing it precisely out of an anti-Semitic intent. And even though some of the proponents today do it in the name of higher values, they enjoy the support of parties and individuals who resonate to anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim, and anti-Semitic attitudes. Finally, and to return to this issue of online anti-Semitic spread, the fact is, even as we become more and more adept at identifying and mapping the sources of this online anti-Semitism, recognizing as well its real-world consequences, I fear that we sometimes feel it is almost a hopeless struggle to stop it. We're vastly outnumbered, and we're surely outfunded by these social media giants. Content monitors and community liaisons, however sincere, however dedicated they may be, are simply no match for the algorithms designed to push grievance as these companies' basic business model. We've had enough experience now, I believe, to know that voluntary commitments and even penalties and fines imposed in those countries that have the legal ability to do so are just not sufficient. Frankly, we must acknowledge that if we're going to find alternatives that will work, we may need to look elsewhere. Thank you, Katharina.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andy, for spelling out many of the challenges also that we have been addressing in the EU strategy. And I would like to turn to Ira for a Jewish perspective and also a perspective from the younger Jewish world to spell out what are your expectations. What do you expect of states, maybe also of civil society? What kind of reactions do you expect with regards to being able to going about your life just as anybody else here in Europe? Please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here, and I will certainly give you some expectations, but disclaimers first. I'm not in a position to share any details about the national strategy, because I'm not working for the office of Felix Klein, and also not for the Central Council, but today giving you a mixed perspective of Jewish communities in Germany. I would like to take you back into the year 2006. I was leading a group of Jewish students from Germany to Prague, actually a few weeks after the second war in Lebanon. Our mission was to make Hasbara, advocacy for Israel and its right to self-defense. It happened after a wave of hate going through the media in Europe, also against Jews. We have prepared a booth with different images and information, qualified information back then from newspapers classically, and also from starting also with websites. We were actively speaking to passers-by, to tourists. We had very controversial discussions indeed about justice and injustice, about legality of this war, but I can't recall any situation where we were attacked or insulted. And the discussions actually ended when the booth was closed. And now imagine same situation today in Prague, or maybe in your respective countries. Preparing for this session, I understood once again how radical and polarized any discourse has become. So to me, today, such a situation would mean being very heated, very emotional, polarized, and most probably also very dangerous. Well, many things have changed since my student time. Life for us Jews has become more and more challenging in many ways in Europe, and therefore I'm grateful that there is an instrument in place which is eager to tackle many of them. I think it's not a secret that Germany is very well progressing in drafting the national strategy, and I had a chance to look inside the draft. And I can tell you, especially for those who is currently in the process of designing the national strategy, it's worth looking into it, and it's an impressive instrument, a great pattern to deal with anti-Semitism and foster Jewish life. And we need also to commend that having this kind of strategy, European or on a national level, is not for granted. After Europe has witnessed the extermination of European Jewry, these strategies are a huge achievement for European society and humanity, a giant step forward. Representing one of the Jewish voices, I'm thankful also that Jewish organizations were asked before the strategy was drafted to provide insights, to provide our perspective, and this is also not for granted. And I can only recommend, if you're still in the process, ask also Jewish communities, Jewish organizations, other civil society organizations to provide their insights. And since I'm working in the digital field, I'm used to design a product in the so-called minimum viable manner, the product with a minimum standard, and I'm happy to share a few standards. I know we're proceeding with time, but I will just build on what Rabbi Baker has said. So, standard one is, first of all, for me and for the Jewish organization's perspective, that we need to acknowledge the need to fight anti-Semitism as a reason of state, and to fight anti-Semitism as a special kind of hate. Many states have, of course, anti-racism and anti-discrimination strategies and measures in place, but anti-Semitism requires a different approach and should be treated in its particularities and special manifestations. IRA definition has been mentioned already many times, but I just want to stress this point that the best framework currently and the basis to define anti-Semitism is IRA definition for us indeed. So the next standard is also to adopt it and to implement it on the ground, for example, with trainings for police and administrations. And as part of the IRA definition, we also need to include Holocaust legacy and recognize Israel's right to exist, because both Holocaust distortion and anti-Zionism are today main forms of anti-Semitism. And also we need to speak about, within the national strategies, about glorification of Nazi collaborators, especially, as we have heard, still streets are named after those in Eastern Europe. And these three preconditions can only work and be effective when there is a strong legal framework and law enforcement in place. Another set of standards would deal, for me, with measures. So we had conditions and frameworks, and now I would like to mention a few measures which I would consider a standard to be included into the national strategy. When it comes to the strategy, we need somehow to collect measurable data about anti-Semitic attacks, incidents, and hate speech, also online, very important. We need measures to empower and strengthen civil society actors and initiatives. And we need a strong and important block of Holocaust education. And I think we need education on very different level, actually. Not only start in school, but maybe start even earlier. Include vocational training and higher education. And for me, also professional education, because anti-Semitism does not graduate from school or university. It continues to be omnipresent in very different levels of our lives. And in my work, I deal more with fostering Jewish life. And when we speak about fostering Jewish life, an absolute requirement for any national strategy is, as Rabbi Baker has also mentioned, safety and security. And they are strongly connected to the clarity about funding and investments for security measures. And yes, many communities in European countries still have to pay for their own security, and this is very sad. Furthermore, my observation is, while we speak about security, we usually speak about the physical security. And we often forget about the cyber and cyber threats, which we also need to tackle. And here is the link to the digital. The digital dimension of anti-Semitism and the insecurities and threats which derive from it should also be addressed by national strategies. Digital is, to me, nowadays one of the most important fields when we speak about fostering Jewish life, and I can give you some examples from my work. I deal with advising communities. I have communities which abstain from having any web presence or using any digital tools because it's a matter of insecurity for them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ira. We will now go more into the digital sphere and how Canada has developed a strategy to address specifically anti-Semitism online, and it would be interesting to hear from you what which measures have worked, and where do you see progress? I know that there is a lot of hate out there, and there are many challenges that we face, and we always find it is an uphill battle. But as you have this specific strategy addressing anti-Semitism online, please, Ambassador Dion, you have the floor.
Thank you, Katharina. I address this important panel as the Prime Minister of Canada's Special Envoy to the European Union and the whole of Europe, but also as a proxy of the Honorable Erwin Cotler, Canada's Special Envoy on preserving Holocaust remembrance and combating anti-Semitism. Many of you know Professor Cotler, who has dedicated his long and impressive career to defending human rights and fighting racism, anti-Semitism, and hate, including as Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, a parliamentarian, a recognized scholar, an international human rights lawyer, and Katharina and Rabbi Baker and Madame Rosensaft, you mentioned the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. Professor Cotler is a strong supporter of this definition. It is an honor for me to represent Dr. Cotler and seize this opportunity to highlight Canada's commitment to fight anti-Semitism and hate everywhere, including on the internet. The Czech presidency of the Council of the EU is to be congratulated for having planned during the Terezín Declaration Conference this panel on national strategies to combat anti-Semitism and online hate speech, two interconnected plagues where online hatred has real physical repercussions for many members of Jewish communities around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not against social media. I think social media is a great invention, which none of us would be able to do without in today's days and age. Think about it. Think what was our life before that. It is a formidable platform and tool to promote understanding, mutual respect, solidarity, and inclusion. Social media has the power to reach, inform, and mobilize an incredible number of individuals around the globe and enhance knowledge of the past, including the absolute horror that was the Holocaust, the suffering of the victims, and the bravery of survivors. And I know that many of us are doing exactly that, using social media to fight anti-Semitism everywhere. This proportion is, no, okay. An overwhelming majority of adults in developed countries have an account or at least one social media platform, almost everyone. In my country, in Canada, 94% of the adult population has an account on a media platform. Worldwide, the growth potential of the internet remains enormous. According to the Hootsuite Global State of Digital Report 2021, of the 7.8 billion human beings, 4.2 billion are active users of social networks in 2021, or if you want, 53.6% of the world population. And this proportion is increasing rapidly. From January 2020 to January 2021, the world population increased by 1%, but active users of social media increased by 13.2%. In the most populated countries, 55% of Indians, 35% of Chinese, 73% of Pakistanis, and 50% of Nigerians still have yet to be connected to the internet. These billions of internet users of today and tomorrow must enjoy freedom of expression in media, free from the spread of hatred, anti-Semitism, and violence. The overarching goal for Canada is to achieve what we call digital inclusion, whereby an informed and engaged public can participate meaningfully in society, both online and offline. This highly desirable goal is far from being achieved today, to say the least. The principle of net neutrality and the promotion of a free, open, interoperable, and secure Internet are duly included in the international multi-stakeholder working group's guiding principles on diversity of content online, which Canada helped to develop in 2021. Authoritarian regimes flout this principle of net neutrality and censor the Internet in every way, precisely because the Internet is a formidable instrument of freedom. And whatever we do, we should not give any ability to these authoritarian regimes to use our democratic efforts to fight hate and anti-Semitism as an excuse, as a justification for the censorship they impose in their countries. But in a free society, like the one we have, freedom of opinion and of the media must be expressed in compliance with laws against hatred, defamation, and incitement to violence. The same must be true for social media. That's the point. Unfortunately, online platforms have increasingly become a tool to incite, publish, and promote terrorism, violence, and hatred. We must combat anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial and distortion online for the terrible harm they inflict on Jewish people, to their safety and dignity, and also because anti-Semitism is intimately linked to other forms of online violence, racism, and xenophobia, following the adage, what begins with Jews doesn't end with Jews. In the same way, what begins on the Internet does not end on the Internet. As Canadian Heritage Minister Pablo Rodriguez often said, online hate doesn't stay online. It fuels itself online and takes over our streets. The Anti-Semitism Worldwide Report 2021 identifies a sharp rise of anti-Semitism appearing online, often related to the COVID-19 pandemic. In Europe, for example, anti-Semitic content in French and German surged on major online platforms during the coronavirus pandemic, according to the 2021 report published by the European Commission. It is a heinous shame that the COVID-19 outbreak has been used by some as a pretext to, once again, target the Jewish community as a scapegoat. In Canada, the Jewish community remains the most likely religious group to be targeted for hate crimes and suffers increasingly high levels of anti-Semitism globally. In my country, which is home to the fourth largest Jewish community in the world, with over 390,000 Jewish people living across Canada, 70% of all reported hate incidents are committed against Jewish people, in spite of the fact that Jewish people make up a little over 1% of the population. That being said, there is a series of encouraging precedents in fighting anti-Semitism, including online anti-Semitism, which were recently set around the world. The 2021 report from the Cantor Center highlights that governments are increasing resources allocated to protect Jewish communities and are appointing special envoys to combat anti-Semitism, and if your country did not do it yet, just insist that it should be done. It is therefore of the utmost importance that we learn from each other to identify best practices, hence the value of a panel like this one. For our part in Canada, the government is determined to further extend its fight against anti-Semitism to online media, at home and abroad. This is why Minister Rodriguez will soon table a bill to counter online hate. Deeply concerned that social media platforms are being used to promote racist and anti-Semitic views that put individuals at risk, the Government of Canada will create a more equitable and secure regulatory framework to govern online platforms. We will require online services to be like traditional media, accountable for the content they host. In addition, the Government of Canada will propose legislation to amend Canada's criminal code so that it prohibits the communication of statements that willfully promote anti-Semitism by condoning, denying, or downplaying the Holocaust. This will, of course, be in accordance with privacy law. Furthermore, Canada's Digital Citizenship Initiative provides funding towards preventing radicalization to violence, protecting vulnerable communities, and supporting community-led digital and civic literacy programming to address online disinformation and hate speech. The Government of Canada actively supports research in digital media and civic literacy activities across the country to build citizens' resilience towards online disinformation. We have also created special funding streams to counter disinformation and misinformation related to COVID-19, which can be of domestic or foreign origin, notably from Russia, as we all know too well. I take this opportunity to say that Canada strongly condemns Russia's weaponization of disinformation to justify its war in Ukraine, including through false accusations of Nazism and neo-Nazism. Putin's claim to denazify Ukraine against a democratically elected government with a Jewish president is a clear example of Holocaust distortion. Around the world, Canada is actively working with like-minded at the bilateral and multilateral level to combat anti-Semitism and to promote the memory of the Holocaust. As 2022 chair of the Freedom Online Coalition, Canada is advancing a vision of democracy in the digital age, which begins with digital inclusion. We are collaborating closely with our allies and social media platforms to prevent the internet from being used as a tool to incite and promote anti-Semitism, terrorism, violence, and hatred.
We have to come to a close, please.
Notably, Canada is following efforts in Europe with great interest. Lawmakers are currently deliberating in the EU a bill that would target companies that do not tackle harmful and illegal content on their platforms. Ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, governments must do their part to fight harmful content online. Issues such as disinformation cannot be ignored. Content recommendation algorithms should promote content free and of hatred and anti-Semitism. Transparency of the impact of algorithmic treatments of online content should be the rule. As you see, Canada is continuing its efforts to tirelessly and resolutely combat anti-Semitism online and offline, challenge discrimination, advocate for an internet that is open, free, and secure, and build a more inclusive and peaceful world for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Dion, for showing the challenges and also some of the responses coming from Canada, and I believe on the side of many other countries as well. I would like to, before we now come to František Vrabel, already inform you that we will then open a short question and answer session. So in case you have a question to one of the panelists, please have it ready. So after the intervention by Mr. Vrabel, we can take your questions. You deal with disinformation online, hate speech online, and you have also technical solutions to this. I understand you're also very much in fighting distortion coming out of Russia. Could you share a bit some of the challenges that we face today, but also with regards to the metaverse. And we heard yesterday from Meta directly what is planned, that basically we can be in, can be beamed back in time and participating in discussions in the old Roman Empire, or I think our fears where then, you can also build an online concentration camp and go there. And what does that mean if someone then says, well, it wasn't that bad after all here? These kind of challenges that can be used to the good, certainly, but are we prepared technically and also politically to face these challenges, or are we heading down a road that in a way is similar to when the internet first started, with lacking rules?
So thank you so much, Katharina, for a long list of fantastic questions. Unfortunately, we will not have enough time to, or I will not have enough time to respond to all of them. But I will try shortly. What I would like to share with you is like a bigger picture, that anti-Semitism is part of harmful content, which includes also Russian or Chinese or Iranian disinformation, and also hate speech. So we should view it through this lens. Secondly, there has been discussion, of course, about the implication or the result of anti-Semitism, which is the physical security concerns and digital threats concerns. And there's another layer, which is these psychological manipulations, which hasn't been addressed yet, and it is not part of. It is not, I would say, of mainstream yet. And this is exactly what Russians are doing. And because we have the aggressive war in Ukraine going on, the Russian aggressive war, and they are implementing exactly this. What the Russians are doing in their hybrid war efforts is not like sending or publishing or supporting media houses or disinformation houses around Europe or the globe with individual disinformation, which is like the prevailing opinion that we should fight disinformation. But what they're doing is they conduct so-called psychological operations in each individual country, and those psychological operations are long-term, taking years. And goal of these psychological operations is to impose chaos in the democratic societies. And their ultimate goal is to destruct our democratic system. How they do it is in the center of their strategy is so-called relativization of the truth. So they present multiple versions of different events. Some of them are more truthful than the others. But now I would make a sidestep to social media, where their business model and the micro-targeting business, the business model based on micro-targeting needs or calls for presenting multiple versions of the world. So we are getting, or most of the people are getting, different versions of the world. So the model of social media, namely Facebook, very much supports this Russian technique. And in addition to that, what the Russians are doing, and Chinese are learning from them fast, is that they try to leverage every single gap or problem of the society, of the particular society. And of course, anti-Semitism is part of it. So Russians are supporting the anti-Semitic content or anti-Semitism worldwide. So in my opinion, the only way how to, or that we should focus more on prevention, on the information prevention, and because social media has become the dominant media platform, and at the end, people don't think anything else but what they perceived through media. And we conducted multiple analysis with, I would say, with a very sad result. What people think is just a mirror reflection of what is written in social media. And what social media, the current business model does is that they not only disseminate the hate speech or harmful content or anti-Semitism or Russian disinformation. We could live with that. We would survive that. But what they do is through algorithmic amplification, they amplify the content. So just an example, if there's like 5% of all the information available is lie or hate, or like harmful content to include anti-Semitism, then what Facebook and others do, they multiply it by 10, for example. So the society is exposed to 10 times more or 20 times more of this toxic content. So we should focus in the military jargon, this is called, like we call it, on the center of gravity. And the center of gravity is to regulate social media, and we have no other choice if we do not want to see the fail or the destruction of our democracies. So until now, I spoke about the current version or the current stage of what is happening in the disinformation and hate speech, harmful content, and anti-Semitism field or area. The future with metaverse and Meta, and by the way, Mark Zuckerberg doesn't have any social responsibility, and I think that the Jewish communities all over the world should focus on addressing the fact that social media should be regulated, so that we should influence or try to influence our legislators to focus on that. Like I am happy to hear that Canada has a plan in this respect. And we often face the argument that we cannot be the censors, we cannot apply censorship. And here is like a deep misunderstanding of the problem, like a prevailing opinion, or which is censorship can be like, we can call censorship by stopping the content not to be published. And this relates to what is called dissemination. But the problem, as I explained before, is in the amplification. And if we regulate the algorithms in a way that they would not amplify the content, this is the way how we should go. And so this is the situation with the existing situation. And the future, to include metaverse, is like a dystopy. It's a real dystopy, because nobody will be able to recognize what is truth, what is not. It will be focused on audio and video content, which our brain, mainly the video, is like perceived like immediately. And we like, it goes like, it doesn't go through the cognitive filter in our brain, so we just receive it. And just to describe the dystopy that we face, and that Mark Zuckerberg and other greedy entrepreneurs with no social responsibility plan for us, is that not only that they will like imitate or put lies or or something harmful to the mouths or faces of politicians or celebrities, but people will be surrounded by avatars, and nobody will know if they are real people or not. And of course, the technology, the artificial intelligence could make in orders of magnitude more avatars than people live on our planet, and they will just kidnap to include all the political discussions and dialogue. So we should be extremely careful with what these people who have no responsibility, like the big tech entrepreneurs, what they are planning with democratic society and with the people all over the world. Let me finish my part with a quote of Sacha Baron Cohen. Most of you know this famous American comedian with Jewish roots, of course, who said, right to speech is not right to reach. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Also for this outlook in the future, I believe it is something that, although most of us are not in the age bracket that concerns us directly at the moment, I believe we have to have it all on our radar because it is something to be discussed. Yes, please, Ambassador Eisenstadt.
I want to thank the panelists for an extraordinary presentation and Katharina for your leadership. First, let me start with, I omitted inadvertently in my remarks the major contribution that Rabbi Andrew Baker and the American Jewish Committee made from the very start of the inspiration for the Terezín Declaration and for helping draft it. Having said that, I'd like to ask Rabbi Baker, but also all the panelists, we've talked about the growth of anti-Semitism and ways to combat it. What we haven't discussed is what the roots are. Why is it? I mean, Rabbi Baker, you were here in 2009, we're now 2022. What factors have occurred that have led to an upsurge in anti-Semitism? So it's fine to try to deal with the problem, and you're doing that admirably. The question, though, is what underlying factors have led to this increase? And
thank you. There is another question here. I take one more. Yes, please. Please, Herr von Trautmannsdorf.
Thank you very much. Just a short question to František Vrabel. Actually, what is the role, the potential role of sponsored civil society action against disinformation in the net? Is that something which one could conceive, particularly also in relation to countering anti-Semitism, hidden anti-Semitism, which is much more important than visible anti-Semitism because it's easier to deal with our legislation on hate speech? Thank you.
Thank you. And
hello, my name is Avital Greenberg. I'm the president of the European Union of Jewish Students. I'd be curious to hear, young people are the #1 users of social media, and they are the #1 of affected people. They are also the first ones entering new popping up social media spaces that we might not be aware of yet. So my question is, how are young people involved in the process to make sure that we have that we monitor all relevant spaces?
Thank you very much. Now we have 10 minutes, which means 2.5 minutes for each of you to reply to different aspects of these 3 questions. Please, Andy, you start, but I will be taking time, okay? So it's fair here.
You know, when we've talked about efforts on Holocaust restitution, we've frequently cited the Czech Republic as an example of taking it up. When governments were being pushed, this was the one country where there was actually popular support for restitution. And it actually raised a lot of questions, which reflects, I think, a larger one. When someone is anti-Semitic, we're not puzzled. We don't ask why. When someone seems to be supportive of Jews or our issues, that's the thing that leads us to some questions, which sort of reverses everything that we would like to think should be out there in the world. Anti-Semitism is with us for 2 millennia. It's kind of hard to say it's one particular thing that will cure it. But I think, Stu, one of the things that has changed over the last 20, 25 years, there's no mistaking it, it's Israel. It's literally, I think that, again, you looked at surveys in Europe through the 1990s, attitudes toward Jews personally were always increasing in being more and more positive. We saw a surge of anti-Semitic incidents triggered by events in Israel, and it led to really, again, a significant part of our definition of anti-Semitism relates to Israel. So I think in a way, Israel had become a new force, a new target, but of course, all Jews are associated with Israel and have been part of that. It's no less fear when being directed at Israel than it has been over millennia being directed as Jews, at Jews.
Thank you. Can you reply to the question about the crowd?
So thank you for that wonderful question, how the civil society can, or if it can help to solve or to complement to the solution of social media regulation. I believe certainly for the following reasons. First of all, the political leadership, and it certainly applies to European Union, to include our country, the Czech Republic, and it certainly applies to the United States. They are not educated in this field enough. Most of the legislators, they grew up not in the digital era, but in the era of print, and quite a lot they do not understand the new situation, so they need to be educated. So this is like our role, I believe. And the second reason is that of course, many of them, they already understand the problem, but they fear or they're afraid to solve it, not to be accused for censorship and be against the freedom of speech. So I think that we as civil society or individuals, we can help them, assist them in changing the public opinion or educating the public opinion that the regulation is necessary and that it has nothing in common with denying freedom of speech.
Yes, thank you. I think at the EU we say what is illegal offline is also illegal online, and it needs to be prosecuted, which is also a huge role for the states to actually act based on the legislation that is there.
Yeah, Katharina, but this relates to what is called dissemination. But the argument that you used doesn't apply to the amplification, like applying yeah.
That's why now we have the DSA, which looks at the algorithms, yes, on the amplification, the new legislation in the EU. Ambassador Dion, please.
Madame, your question is, what can we do to fight anti-Semitism? I explained what Canada will do about anti-Semitism online, but I would say we cannot have any rest. It's a fight of every day The government of Canada will create a new museum in Montreal about the Holocaust. We never stop to do this fight. Just give you an example in 1 minute. I have been member of parliament on the island of Montreal during 22 years in a riding that is very multicultural. One day, stupid kids burned the library of one of my Jewish community. So I phoned right away all the leaders of the other communities, and I said, if I am your friend, you will be there. We'll do a vigil on this, at this library, and we'll speak for humanity, for all of us. And they came, but they would not have come if I didn't phone them. That's the point. My wife would say that over 22 years, I had maybe 3 weekends. All the rest, I was with the communities and trying to build links between them. To succeed, to make diversity a success is what we need to do in Canada to survive as a country. It's our work of every day, and I want to thank all of us to be here today to talk about that.
Thank you very much, and also for really emphasizing the necessity of civil society engagement. Ira, can you address also in particular the youth question and how to engage youth maybe in a positive way as well?
Of course, my pleasure to do it, but before I address the youth, few words on the new anti-Semitism. I don't think it's that new. It's just a new channel, and anti-Semitism is, to me, something very adoptive, and it just finds new channels, new forms and manifestations. It finds new scapegoats. So we deal basically with the core problem in a different way. And it's also a matter of amplification. And to address Avital's question, well, there is a lot to do about youth, and we're just starting. But first of all, I think that tackling anti-Semitism online is not only about regulating content or business models, but yes, we need to take into our boat of actors, especially the youth. And what we do is we're coming up, we at the Central Welfare Board of Jews in Germany, where I deal with digital questions, we educate also the youth, because being a digital native doesn't make you digitally responsible. So first of all, we need to speak about internet politics and internet policies, and educate the new generation being able to advocate against anti-Semitism and for Israel also online, and to understand the algorithms of social media, to be prepared. And what we will start soon is having kind of an innovation digital hub where we will use the young generation as experts actually, and hope that they will be part of and our partner to tackle anti-Semitism, cyber problem, as well as algorithms.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for a very rich panel, for your comments. Thanks to the audience. I could hear needles drop, so thank you very much for your engagement. And we have, if I'm well informed, do we have a break? Robert, there's a break now? Right into the other panel. So voila, no break.